I flew 14 hours with my son to surprise my daughter-in-law for anniversary. But what I saw shook me. On the edge of his bed sat my daughter-in-law with messy hair, while my brother slept peacefully. Burning with rage, I took my son and called a taxi. My son whispered, "Mommy, don't worry. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd fly halfway across the world just to watch everything I loved burn to ash in front of my eyes. But here I am, 63 years old, sitting in my living room in Milwaukee with a cup of cold coffee and a heart full of secrets that could destroy what's left of my family. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, and this is the story of how one surprise visit turned into the ugliest unraveling of my life, and how my 9-year-old grandson became the most dangerous person in the room without anyone knowing it until it was far, far too late. Before I tell you what happened, I need you to understand something. Comment below and tell me where you're watching this from, because I promise you, no matter what country you're in, no matter what language you speak, betrayal feels the same everywhere. It cuts the same. It bleeds the same. And if you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart only to have them twist the knife when you weren't looking, then you already know why I did what I did. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories about real people, real pain, and real revenge, check the description box below. You'll find more there. But right now, stay with me. Because what I'm about to tell you is something I've never said out loud to anyone. It started 4 months ago, in early June. My son, Benjamin, Benji, I've called him since he was born, had been living in Sydney, Australia for almost 6 years. He moved there for work when he was 28, some tech job I never fully understood but always pretended to. He met a woman there named Vanessa Calloway. She was Australian, blonde, sharp-tongued, and everything I wasn't. I tried to like her. I really did. When they got married 3 years ago in a small ceremony overlooking the harbour, I smiled in every photo. I hugged her. I told her I was happy. And I think, back then, I even believed it. But Vanessa always made me feel like I was in the way. Like I was something to be tolerated, not loved. She never called me Mom, even though I asked her to. She called me Eleanor, in that clipped, polite way that felt like a wall. And when my grandson, Oliver, was born 2 years ago, I thought things would get better. I thought a baby would soften her. But it didn't. She kept me at arm's length, always busy, always unavailable when I wanted to video call, always making excuses about why I couldn't visit more often. So when their 3rd wedding anniversary came around in late June, I decided to do something bold. Something that, looking back now, I wish I'd never even considered. I decided to surprise them. I told Benji I couldn't make it because of a doctor's appointment, just a little white lie to keep the surprise intact. But I'd already booked the flights. 14 hours from Chicago to Sydney, with a layover in Los Angeles. I even brought Oliver a stuffed kangaroo and a Spider-Man backpack. I imagined his face when he saw me. I imagined Benji's shock, his joy, his arms around me. I imagined Vanessa's surprise too, though in hindsight, I should have paid more attention to the feeling in my gut that whispered, "She won't be happy to see you." What I didn't imagine, what I couldn't have imagined in 1,000 lifetimes, was that my brother would be there too. And not as a guest. Not as a visitor. But as something so much worse. Approx. 735 words, asterisk. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you about my brother, Leonard. Lenny. We grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Racine, Wisconsin, with parents who worked 3 jobs between them and still couldn't keep the lights on half the time. Lenny was 5 years older than me, and for most of my childhood, he was my hero. He taught me how to ride a bike. He scared off the boys who made fun of my crooked teeth. He was loud and charming and always had a joke ready, even when things were falling apart at home. But Lenny also had a darker side, one that didn't show up until we were adults. He drank too much. He gambled too much. He lied too much. And worst of all, he had a way of making you feel like you were the problem, not him. When I got married to my late husband, Richard, Lenny was the best man. Richard died 8 years ago from a heart attack. Sudden, brutal, no warning. And Lenny was there for me after. He helped me sort through Richard's things. He stayed with me for weeks when I couldn't sleep. He made me laugh when I thought I'd never laugh again. So when Benji invited him to visit Sydney last year, I thought it was sweet. I thought it was family taking care of family. Lenny stayed for 2 weeks, and when he came back, he told me how beautiful Australia was, how happy Benji seemed, how Vanessa was a real firecracker. He said it with a grin that I didn't think twice about at the time. But now, looking back, I can see it. That grin wasn't admiration. It was something uglier. It was possession. I didn't know Lenny had been back to Sydney twice since then. I didn't know he'd been texting Vanessa. I didn't know that while I was sitting in Milwaukee, alone in the house Richard and I had bought 40 years ago, my brother was slithering into my son's life like a snake in the garden. And if you've ever had someone in your family betray you, not a stranger, not a friend, but blood, then you know that the pain is different. It's deeper. It's the kind of wound that doesn't heal, it just scars over and throbs every time you think about it. The flight to Sydney was long. Endless. I sat in the middle seat between a man who snored like a chainsaw and a woman who kept elbowing me every time she shifted. I watched 3 movies I don't remember and ate a sandwich that tasted like cardboard. But I didn't care. I was going to see my son. I was going to hold my grandson. I was going to be part of their lives again, even if Vanessa didn't want me there. I told myself I'd win her over. I'd be helpful. I'd babysit. I'd cook. I'd stay out of the way but still be present. I had it all planned out. I landed in Sydney on a Thursday morning, their time. It was winter there, which I hadn't really prepared for. I'd packed like it was summer because in my mind, Australia was always hot. I took a cab from the airport to their apartment in Newtown, a trendy neighborhood full of street art and cafes and young people who looked like they'd never had a hard day in their lives. The cab driver was chatty, asking me if I was visiting family, and I told him yes, that I was surprising my son for his anniversary. He smiled and said, "Lucky son." I smiled back, feeling proud and nervous and excited all at once. When I got to their building, I stood outside for a minute, just looking up at the 4th floor window where I knew they lived. The curtains were drawn. It was almost noon. I thought maybe they were out, or maybe they were still asleep. Benji had always been a late sleeper, even as a kid. I texted him a casual message, "hope you're having a great day. Love you." Then I went inside, took the elevator up, and knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. That should have been my first red flag. But I was too excited, too eager, too stupidly hopeful to pay attention. I stepped inside, and the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. There were dishes in the sink. A bottle of wine on the counter, half empty. 2 glasses. I set my suitcase down by the door and called out, "Benji? Vanessa? It's me, Eleanor." Surprise. My voice echoed through the apartment, but no one answered. I walked down the hallway toward the bedrooms, my heart starting to pound in a way that wasn't excitement anymore. It was dread. It was instinct. It was the feeling you get right before everything you thought you knew gets ripped apart. I pushed open the bedroom door, and that's when I saw it. The scene that would replay in my mind every single night for months afterward. The scene that would make me question everything I thought I knew about my family, my brother, and my own judgment. Vanessa was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing nothing but an oversized t-shirt that didn't belong to my son. Her hair was messy, tangled, like she'd just woken up. And in the bed, under the covers, was Lenny. My brother. Sound asleep. Peaceful. Like he belonged there. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing, trying to find an innocent explanation, but there wasn't one. There was no explanation that could make this okay. Vanessa looked up at me, and instead of guilt or shame or panic, I saw something else in her eyes. Defiance. Like she'd been caught but didn't care. Like she was daring me to say something. And behind me, I heard a small voice, a voice that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "Grandma? Why is Uncle Lenny in Mommy's bed?" I turned around, and there was Oliver, my grandson, standing in the hallway in his pajamas, holding a stuffed dinosaur. His big brown eyes were confused, innocent, unaware of what he was looking at but sensing that something was wrong. I wanted to scoop him up and run. I wanted to shield him from this. But I was frozen, trapped between rage and disbelief and a sorrow so deep it felt like drowning. Benji wasn't home. I found out later he was at work, completely unaware that his wife and his uncle had been carrying on an affair right under his nose, in his own bed, in the home he'd built for his family. Vanessa stood up slowly, like she had all the time in the world. "Eleanor," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "You weren't supposed to be here." That sentence, those 6 words, hit me harder than anything else. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just annoyance that I'd shown up uninvited and ruined whatever twisted thing she had going with my brother. I felt my hands shaking. I felt my chest tightening. I felt every ounce of love I'd tried to give this woman curdle into pure, white-hot hatred. "Get dressed," I said, my voice low and shaking. "And get out of this apartment. Now." Vanessa laughed. She actually laughed. It was cold, bitter, mocking. "This is my apartment, Eleanor. You don't get to tell me what to do." Behind her, Lenny stirred, starting to wake up. I couldn't look at him. If I looked at him, I knew I'd lose control completely. I grabbed Oliver's hand and pulled him toward the door. He was crying now, asking me what was happening, why Mommy looked mad, why Uncle Lenny was there. I didn't have answers. I didn't have anything except the desperate need to get out of that apartment before I did something I'd regret. I called a cab from the lobby, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. Oliver kept asking questions, and I kept telling him it was okay, that Grandma was here, that everything would be fine. But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. And as we sat in the back of that cab, driving through the streets of Sydney with no plan and no destination, Oliver leaned over and whispered something that made my blood run cold. "Mommy, don't worry. I already took care of it." I looked down at him, at his small, serious face, and asked what he meant. He didn't answer. He just hugged his dinosaur tighter and stared out the window. And that's when I realized that my grandson, my sweet, quiet, 9-year-old grandson, had been watching. He'd been listening. He'd been planning. And whatever he'd done, whatever he meant by took care of it, was something I wouldn't fully understand until much, much later. But in that moment, sitting in the back of that cab with my heart shattered and my family destroyed, I felt a strange, dark sense of pride mixed with fear. Because Oliver wasn't just a victim of this mess. He was a player. And the game was just beginning. If this story is hitting close to home for you, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone you trusted, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And check the description box below for more stories like this, because trust me, you're not alone in this. None of us are. I took Oliver to a hotel near Circular Quay. It was one of those bland, corporate places with beige walls and generic art, but it was clean and safe and far away from that apartment. I got us a room with 2 beds, ordered room service, chicken nuggets for Oliver, nothing for me because I couldn't eat, and tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. My hands were still shaking. My mind was racing. I kept seeing Vanessa's face, that smug, defiant look, and Lenny's sleeping form, so comfortable, so at ease in my son's bed. It made me sick. It made me furious. It made me want to burn the whole world down. Oliver sat on the bed, eating his nuggets slowly, methodically, like nothing was wrong. But I could see it in his eyes. He was processing, thinking, calculating. He'd always been a quiet kid, the kind who observed more than he spoke, and I'd always thought that was just his personality. But now I wondered if there was more to it. If he'd been watching his mother and his uncle for weeks, maybe months, and keeping it all inside, waiting for the right moment to act. The thought terrified me. "Oliver," I said, sitting down next to him. "What did you mean in the cab? When you said you already took care of it?" He looked up at me, those big brown eyes unblinking, and said, "I can't tell you yet, Grandma. But you'll see. Mommy's going to be very sorry." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, like he was talking about a school project. I wanted to press him, to demand answers, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to see what he'd done. I wanted to see Vanessa suffer the way I was suffering. I called Benji. It was one of the hardest calls I've ever had to make. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding rushed and distracted. "Hey, Mom, what's up? I thought you couldn't make it." I took a deep breath and said, "Benji, I need you to come to the Harbor View Hotel on George Street. Room 412. Right now. Don't ask questions. Just come." There was a long pause, and then he said, "Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on?" I couldn't say it over the phone. I couldn't put it into words. So I just said, "Please, Benji. Trust me. Come now." He arrived 30 minutes later, looking panicked and confused. When he walked into the hotel room and saw Oliver and me sitting there, his face went from confusion to alarm. "Mom, what happened? Why are you here? Why is Oliver with you?" I stood up, walked over to him, and said, "Sit down, Benji. There's something you need to know." And then I told him. I told him everything I'd seen in that apartment. I told him about Vanessa and Lenny. I watched his face as the words sank in, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his eyes go from disbelief to horror to a kind of hollow emptiness that broke my heart all over again. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just sat there, staring at the floor, his hands gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Are you sure?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe you misunderstood." "Maybe." I cut him off. "Benji, I saw them. With my own eyes. There's no misunderstanding." He nodded slowly, like he was trying to absorb the information, like he was trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. And then he said, "Where is she now? Where's Vanessa?" I told him I didn't know, that I'd left her in the apartment with Lenny, that I'd taken Oliver and run. He stood up abruptly, grabbed his phone, and started pacing. He tried calling Vanessa, but she didn't answer. He tried texting her, but she didn't respond. He called Lenny, and that's when I saw the rage finally break through. Lenny answered, and I could hear his voice through the phone, casual and unconcerned, asking Benji what was up. Benji screamed into the phone, words I'd never heard him say before, words full of venom and betrayal and pain. And then he hung up, threw the phone onto the bed, and collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Oliver watched all of this silently. He didn't cry. He didn't ask questions. He just watched, his little face expressionless, like he was storing it all away for later. I went over to Benji and put my hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry." He looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes, and he said, "How could she do this, Mom? How could he do this?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't. Betrayal doesn't make sense. It doesn't follow logic. It just happens, like a car crash or a lightning strike, and you're left standing in the wreckage trying to figure out how to keep breathing. That night, Benji stayed in the hotel with us. He didn't want to go back to the apartment. He didn't want to see Vanessa. He didn't want to face any of it. We ordered more room service, though none of us ate much, and we watched cartoons with Oliver until he fell asleep between us on the bed. And as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I kept thinking about what Oliver had said. Asterisk, I already took care of it. Asterisk, what had he done? And why was I so eager to find out? The next morning, Benji went back to the apartment. He told me he needed to confront Vanessa, to get answers, to figure out what happened next. I stayed with Oliver at the hotel, and for hours, I waited, anxious and angry and scared. When Benji finally called, his voice was hollow. "She's gone," he said. "She took her stuff and left. No note. No explanation. Just gone." I asked about Lenny, and Benji said he was gone too. They'd both disappeared, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. And that's when I knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of something much, much worse. In the days that followed, Benji tried to piece together what had happened. He checked Vanessa's phone records, her emails, her bank accounts. He found evidence of the affair, text messages between her and Lenny that went back almost a year, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, everything you'd expect from two people who thought they'd never get caught. The messages were explicit, cruel, mocking. In one, Vanessa had joked about how clueless Benji was. In another, Lenny had written, "He'll never know. He's too busy working to notice." Reading those messages felt like being stabbed over and over again. Not just for Benji, but for me too. Because Lenny was my brother. My blood. And he'd betrayed his own nephew without a second thought. Benji filed for divorce immediately. He contacted a lawyer, started the paperwork, and made it clear he wanted full custody of Oliver. Vanessa didn't fight it. In fact, she didn't respond at all. She'd vanished completely, and no one knew where she'd gone. Lenny had vanished too. I tried calling him, texting him, even showed up at his apartment in Milwaukee, but he was gone. His landlord said he'd moved out overnight, left no forwarding address, and owed 2 months' rent. It was like they'd planned it, like they'd known this day would come and had an escape route ready. But here's the thing, Oliver didn't seem upset about any of it. While Benji was falling apart, barely sleeping, barely eating, Oliver was calm. Too calm. He went to school, did his homework, played with his toys, and never asked about his mother. Not once. When Benji asked him if he missed Mommy, Oliver just shrugged and said, "Not really." It was unsettling. It was wrong. And it made me wonder, again, what he'd meant by "I already took care of it." I decided to talk to him. One afternoon, while Benji was at a meeting with his lawyer, I took Oliver to a park near the hotel. We sat on a bench, watching other kids play on the swings and slides, and I said, "Oliver, honey, I need you to be honest with me. What did you do? What did you mean when you said you took care of it?" He looked at me with those serious, unblinking eyes and said, "I recorded them, Grandma. I recorded everything." My heart stopped. "What do you mean you recorded them?" He pulled out a small tablet from his backpack, the kind kids use for games and videos, and opened a folder. Inside were dozens of video files, each one labeled with a date and time. He clicked on one, and I watched in horror as the screen showed Vanessa and Lenny in the apartment, talking, laughing, kissing. The video was grainy, shot from a low angle, like it had been hidden somewhere in the living room. Oliver had been recording them. For months. He'd set up his tablet, hidden it, and captured everything. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why did you do this?" He looked at me like the answer was obvious. "Because Mommy was being bad," he said simply. "And I wanted proof. So Daddy would believe me if I told him." I didn't know what to say. Part of me was horrified that a 9-year-old had been carrying this burden, watching his mother's affair unfold and documenting it like some kind of detective. But another part of me, a darker, angrier part, was grateful. Because now we had proof. Now we had evidence that could destroy Vanessa in court, that could ensure Benji got custody, that could expose Lenny for the snake he was. "Does your dad know about this?" I asked. Oliver shook his head. "Not yet. I was waiting for the right time." I looked at the tablet, at the dozens of videos, and said, "Oliver, we need to show him. He needs to see this." Oliver nodded, and we went back to the hotel. That evening, when Benji came back, I told him what Oliver had done. At first, Benji didn't believe me. But when Oliver showed him the videos, when he saw with his own eyes the months of betrayal captured on a child's tablet, he broke down. Completely. He cried like I'd never seen him cry before, not even when Richard died. And when he finally composed himself, he looked at Oliver and said, "You did this. You recorded all of this." Oliver nodded. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't know how to tell you." Benji pulled him into a hug and said, "You don't have to be sorry. You did nothing wrong. You were so brave." But I could see the pain in Benji's eyes, the guilt of not noticing, of being so consumed with work that he'd missed the signs. And I could see something else too, a determination, a resolve. Benji wasn't just going to let this go. He was going to use those videos. He was going to make sure Vanessa and Lenny paid for what they'd done. If you're still with me, if this story is making your blood boil the way it made mine, then do me a favor, leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done in my shoes. Tell me if you think I was right to let Benji use those videos, or if I should have protected Oliver from being involved. And check the description box below for more stories like this, because the world is full of betrayal, and sometimes, knowing you're not alone in it makes all the difference. Benji's lawyer was a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rebecca Torres. She was in her 50s, with short silver hair and a reputation for destroying opponents in custody battles. When Benji showed her the videos, her eyes lit up like she'd just been handed a winning lottery ticket. "This is gold," she said. "With this evidence, Vanessa doesn't stand a chance. We'll get full custody, no question." But then she looked at Oliver, who was sitting quietly in the corner of her office, and said, "How old is he?" When Benji told her Oliver was 9, Rebecca frowned. "We need to be careful. Using a child as a witness, especially one who recorded his own mother, could backfire. The judge might see it as traumatic, as something that could damage the child further." Benji's face fell. "So we can't use the videos?" Rebecca shook her head. "I didn't say that. I said we need to be strategic. We use the videos as evidence, but we frame it carefully. We don't put Oliver on the stand. We don't make him relive this. We present the videos as documentation of an unsafe environment, something that Oliver was forced to witness and record out of self-preservation." Benji nodded, though I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. He wanted to put Vanessa on blast. He wanted the world to know what she'd done. But he also wanted to protect his son. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Vanessa finally resurfaced, hiring her own lawyer and fighting for shared custody. She claimed the videos were fake, that I'd manipulated Oliver, that Benji was trying to alienate her from her son. She played the victim, crying in court, talking about how much she loved Oliver, how she'd made a mistake but deserved a second chance. It was disgusting. It was infuriating. And it worked, at least partially. The judge didn't dismiss her claims outright. Instead, he ordered a custody evaluation, which meant weeks of interviews, home visits, and psychological assessments. During this time, Benji, Oliver, and I stayed in Sydney. Benji took a leave of absence from work, and I extended my stay indefinitely. We moved into a small rental house in the suburbs, something temporary but comfortable, and tried to create a sense of normalcy for Oliver. But it was hard. Benji was consumed with the divorce. I was consumed with rage at Lenny, who still hadn't been found. And Oliver was quiet. Too quiet. He stopped talking about the videos. He stopped talking about his mother. He just retreated into himself, spending hours in his room, drawing pictures or playing on his tablet. One night, I went into his room to check on him. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by drawings. I picked one up, and my stomach turned. It was a picture of a woman, clearly Vanessa, with exaggerated features, lying on the ground with red scribbles all around her. It looked like blood. "Oliver," I said gently, "what is this?" He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that scared me. Not sadness. Not confusion. But anger. Cold, calculating anger. "It's Mommy," he said. "She's getting what she deserves." I sat down next to him, trying to stay calm. "Honey, I know you're angry. I know this is hard. But drawing pictures like this, it's not healthy. It's not good for you." He looked at me like I didn't understand, like I was missing something obvious. "Grandma, she hurt Daddy. She hurt us. Don't you want her to pay?" I did. God, I did. But hearing those words come out of a 9-year-old's mouth made me realize how much damage this whole situation had done to him. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was a participant. He was invested in the revenge, in the punishment, in the destruction of his own mother. I talked to Benji about it that night. I told him about the drawings, about Oliver's anger, about my concerns. Benji looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "What am I supposed to do, Mom?" he said. "I can't undo what happened. I can't make this better for him." I told him we needed to get Oliver into therapy, that he needed professional help to process what he'd seen and what he'd done. Benji agreed, and within a week, Oliver was seeing a child psychologist twice a week. But even then, I could see it in Oliver's eyes. He wasn't letting go. He was holding on to his anger, feeding it, nurturing it, waiting for the right moment to use it. The custody evaluation came back in Benji's favor. The evaluator noted that Oliver had a strong bond with Benji, that the home environment was stable, and that Vanessa's affair had created an unsafe and traumatic situation for the child. The judge granted Benji primary custody, with Vanessa getting supervised visitation every other weekend. It was a victory, but it didn't feel like one. Vanessa sobbed in court, claiming she was being punished unfairly, that she loved her son and would do anything to be in his life. And when the judge read the ruling, she looked at Benji with such hatred that I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't going to accept this. She was going to fight back. And fight back she did. 2 weeks after the ruling, Vanessa filed a motion to overturn the custody decision, claiming new evidence had come to light. She alleged that Benji had coerced Oliver into recording the videos, that I'd manipulated the situation to frame her, and that the whole thing was a setup. It was absurd. It was baseless. But it was enough to drag us back into court, back into the nightmare, back into the endless cycle of accusations and counter-accusations. And through it all, Oliver watched. He listened. He waited. And I knew, deep down, that whatever he was planning, whatever revenge he had in mind, it was going to be bigger than anything Benji or I could imagine. The day I flew to Sydney, the day that started this whole nightmare, I'd been so full of hope. I'd imagined hugs and laughter and surprise. I'd imagined being part of my son's life again, being a grandmother who mattered, who was included. But as I stood in that apartment doorway, staring at Vanessa and Lenny, all of that hope evaporated. It was replaced by something colder, something darker. And as I grabbed Oliver's hand and ran, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. In the taxi, Oliver had been so calm. Almost eerily calm. He'd whispered those words, "Asterisk, I already took care of it, asterisk," and I'd felt a chill run down my spine. What had he done? What could a 9-year-old possibly do that would take care of a situation like this? I didn't press him then. I was too overwhelmed, too shocked, too focused on getting us somewhere safe. But later, when I saw those videos, when I realized the extent of what Oliver had been doing, I understood. He hadn't just recorded his mother's affair. He'd been gathering evidence, building a case, preparing for war. And he'd done it all alone, without telling anyone, because he knew no one would believe him without proof. That flight had been 14 hours of anticipation, but the taxi ride away from that apartment felt even longer. Every second stretched into an eternity. I kept replaying what I'd seen: Vanessa's messy hair, Lenny's sleeping face, the unmade bed, the wine glasses. I kept thinking about all the times Lenny had told me how happy Benji seemed, how great Vanessa was. He'd looked me in the eye and lied. He'd hugged me at family dinners and lied. He'd called me on my birthday and lied. And the worst part was, I'd believed him. I'd trusted him. Because he was my brother, and you're supposed to be able to trust your family. But families are complicated. Families are messy. And sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. If you've ever been betrayed by family, you know what I'm talking about. You know that unique kind of pain that comes from being stabbed in the back by someone who shares your blood. And if this story is resonating with you, if you're nodding along and thinking I've been there, then please, share this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And check the description box below for more stories just like this, because you are not alone. When we got to the hotel, I felt like I could finally breathe. But that breath was short-lived. Because as soon as I called Benji, as soon as I had to say the words out loud, the reality of it all crashed down on me. I'd flown 14 hours to surprise my son for his anniversary, and instead, I'd walked into the worst betrayal imaginable. I'd seen my daughter-in-law in bed with my brother. I'd seen the aftermath of months, maybe years, of lies. And I'd seen my grandson, my sweet, innocent grandson, standing in the hallway, asking why Uncle Lenny was in Mommy's bed. That question haunted me. It still haunts me. Because Oliver shouldn't have had to ask that question. He shouldn't have been in that position. He should have been worried about homework and video games and whether he'd get dessert after dinner. But instead, he was worried about his mother's infidelity, about his father's pain, about holding his family together when the adults around him were tearing it apart. And that's on us. That's on Vanessa and Lenny and Benji and me. We failed him. We let him down. And no amount of revenge or justice or custody rulings can undo that. But Oliver didn't see it that way. He saw himself as a protector, as a hero, as someone who'd done what needed to be done to expose the truth. And maybe he was right. Maybe without those videos, Vanessa would have lied her way out of it. Maybe without Oliver's evidence, Benji would have believed her excuses, her manipulations, her tears. Maybe Oliver saved his father from years of continued betrayal. But at what cost? What did it do to a 9-year-old soul to carry that burden, to watch his mother's affair unfold night after night, to set up cameras and hide them and review footage like some kind of child detective? I thought about all of this as I sat in that hotel room, waiting for Benji to arrive, watching Oliver eat his chicken nuggets with that unsettling calm. And I realized that this story, this nightmare, wasn't just about Vanessa and Lenny's betrayal. It was about how betrayal ripples outward, touching everyone, damaging everyone, leaving scars that never fully heal. It was about how children absorb trauma differently than adults, how they process it and weaponize it and carry it forward into their futures. And it was about how revenge, even justified revenge, always comes with a price. When Benji arrived and I told him what I'd seen, I watched my son break. I watched the man I'd raised, the man I was so proud of, crumble into pieces. And I couldn't fix it. I couldn't make it better. All I could do was stand there and tell him the truth, over and over again, until he finally believed it. Until he finally accepted that his wife had betrayed him, that his uncle had betrayed him, that his entire life in Sydney had been built on lies. That night, lying in the dark next to Oliver, listening to Benji's quiet sobs from the other bed, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Vanessa and Lenny get away with this. I wasn't going to let them disappear into the night and start over somewhere else, leaving destruction in their wake. I was going to find them. I was going to make sure they faced consequences. Not just legal consequences, but real ones. The kind that stick. The kind that hurt. Because they'd hurt my son. They'd hurt my grandson. And they'd hurt me. And someone had to make them pay. Finding Lenny became my obsession. While Benji dealt with lawyers and custody battles and trying to keep Oliver's life as normal as possible, I focused on tracking down my brother. I started with the obvious places: his apartment in Milwaukee, the bar where he used to drink, the casino where he gambled away his paychecks. But he was gone. Vanished. Like he'd planned this escape route years in advance and was just waiting for the right moment to use it. I hired a private investigator, a gruff man in his 60s named Dale Patterson who'd worked in law enforcement for 30 years before retiring. I showed him pictures of Lenny and Vanessa, gave him everything I knew about their habits, their friends, their favorite places. Dale listened, took notes, and said he'd see what he could find. 2 weeks later, he called me with news. He'd tracked Lenny to a small town in Oregon, a place called Brookings right on the coast. Lenny was working at a marina, living in a trailer park, using a different last name. I didn't tell Benji. I didn't tell anyone except Oliver, and only because he overheard me on the phone with Dale. When I hung up, Oliver looked at me with those serious eyes and said, "Are you going to go find Uncle Lenny?" I nodded. "Are you going to hurt him?" I paused, not sure how to answer. "I'm going to make sure he faces what he did," I finally said. Oliver thought about this for a moment, then said, "Good. He deserves it." And there was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt. Just cold certainty. I flew to Oregon a week later, telling Benji I needed to handle some things back home in Milwaukee. It was a lie, but I couldn't tell him the truth. He would have tried to stop me, or worse, he would have wanted to come with me, and I needed to do this alone. The flight to Portland was short, and I rented a car to drive the 5 hours down to Brookings. It was beautiful country, forests and ocean and small towns that looked like something out of a postcard. But I wasn't there for the scenery. I was there for blood. I found the marina easily enough. It was a small operation, maybe 30 boats, with a weathered office and a dock that looked like it hadn't been repaired in decades. I walked in and asked the woman at the desk if Leonard Mitchell worked there. She looked at me suspiciously and said, "We don't have anyone by that name." I showed her a picture of Lenny. She studied it, then said, "That's Len Turner. He works maintenance." "Why?" I told her I was an old friend, that I was passing through and wanted to say hello. She didn't look convinced, but she pointed me toward the docks. I found Lenny working on a boat engine, his hands covered in grease, wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt. He looked older, thinner, more worn down than I remembered. When he saw me, his face went white. He stood up slowly, like he was facing a ghost, and said, "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" I walked right up to him, close enough to see the fear in his eyes, and said, "What am I doing here? What are you doing here, Lenny? Hiding? Running away like a coward?" He looked around, making sure no one was listening, then said quietly, "We need to talk." "Not here." I followed him to a small diner on the edge of town. We sat in a booth in the back, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then Lenny spoke. "I know you're angry. I know I messed up. But Eleanor, it wasn't supposed to happen like this." I laughed, a bitter, angry sound. "What was it supposed to be like, Lenny? You sleeping with your nephew's wife? You destroying his family? How was that supposed to go?" He rubbed his face, looking exhausted. "Vanessa and I, it just happened. We didn't plan it. It started when I visited last year, and it just spiraled." I leaned forward, my voice low and shaking. "Don't you dare make excuses. Don't you dare try to justify this. You betrayed your own nephew. You betrayed me. You betrayed everything our family stands for." Lenny looked at me, and for a second, I thought I saw genuine remorse. But then he said, "Benji will get over it. He's young. He'll find someone else. And Vanessa and I, we're in love, Eleanor. Real love." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Real love. Like what he had with Vanessa was somehow more valid, more important, than the family he'd destroyed to have it. I stood up, my hands shaking with rage. "You think this is love? You think running away and hiding in some nowhere town is love? You're pathetic, Lenny. And I came here to tell you that you're not getting away with this. Benji has full custody of Oliver. Vanessa has nothing. And you've lost your family. Your real family. I never want to see you again. Do you understand me? You're dead to me." Lenny's face hardened. "Fine. If that's how you want it. But you should know, Vanessa's pregnant. The words stopped me cold. I sat back down, staring at him. What? He nodded. She's 3 months pregnant. It's mine. I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. Vanessa was pregnant with Lenny's child. Which meant Oliver was going to have a half-sibling. Which meant this nightmare was far from over. It was just beginning a whole new chapter. I left the diner without another word. I got in my car and drove back to Portland in a daze. I couldn't think. I couldn't process what Lenny had told me. All I could think about was how to tell Benji, and whether I should tell him at all. Would knowing make things better or worse? Would it help him move on, or would it just open old wounds? By the time I got back to Sydney 2 days later, I still hadn't decided. But Oliver knew something was wrong. He always knew. Did you find Uncle Lenny? He asked when I got to the house. I nodded. Did you hurt him? I shook my head. But you wanted to, didn't you? I looked at my grandson, at this child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd seen too much, who knew too much, and I said, yes. I wanted to. Oliver nodded, satisfied. Good. Because he deserves to hurt the way he hurt us. And once again, I was struck by how much anger lived inside this small boy, and how dangerous that anger could become if it wasn't dealt with properly. I didn't tell Benji about Vanessa's pregnancy right away. I told myself I was waiting for the right time, but the truth was, I didn't know how to say it. How do you tell your son that the woman who betrayed him is now carrying his uncle's child? How do you add that kind of pain on top of everything he was already dealing with? So I kept it to myself, carrying the secret like a stone in my chest, feeling it grow heavier every day. But secrets have a way of coming out, especially in families. 2 weeks after I got back from Oregon, Vanessa showed up at Benji's house. It was a Saturday morning, and Benji had just dropped Oliver off at a friend's house for a playdate. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. Benji opened it, and there she was, Vanessa, looking thin and tired and strangely fragile. She asked if she could come in, if they could talk. Benji looked at me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him wanted to slam the door in her face. But another part, the part that had loved her, that had built a life with her, wanted answers. He let her in. We sat in the living room, an awkward triangle of tension and unspoken anger. Vanessa started talking, her voice soft and apologetic. She said she was sorry. She said she'd made terrible mistakes. She said she never meant to hurt anyone, that things with Lenny had gotten out of control, that she'd been confused and lost and looking for something she couldn't even name. It was the kind of apology that sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror until it sounded sincere enough. Benji listened, his face expressionless. When she finished, he said, "Why are you here, Vanessa? What do you want?" She took a deep breath and said, "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like smoke. Benji stared at her, his face going from confusion to realization to horror. "It's Lenny's," she continued. "I'm 3 months along. And I wanted you to hear it from me, not from someone else." Benji stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. "Get out." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "Benji, please. I know this is hard, but," he cut her off. "Get out of my house. Now." She stood, looking between Benji and me, and then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Oliver knew. He knew about the baby before any of you did." Benji froze. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa wiped her eyes. A few weeks before Eleanor showed up, Oliver found a pregnancy test in the bathroom. He asked me about it. I told him the truth. And he said he was going to make sure everyone found out. I felt my stomach drop. Oliver had known. He'd known about the pregnancy, and he'd accelerated his plan. He'd made sure I walked in on Vanessa and Lenny that day. He'd orchestrated the whole thing. Benji looked at me, his face pale. "Mom, did you know about this?" I shook my head, but inside, my mind was racing. How much had Oliver planned? How much control had he had over this entire situation? And more importantly, what else was he planning? After Vanessa left, Benji and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he said, "We need to talk to Oliver." When Oliver got home from his playdate, we sat him down in the living room. Benji asked him directly, "Did you know about Vanessa's pregnancy?" Oliver looked at his father with those serious, unblinking eyes and nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" Benji asked, his voice shaking. Oliver said, because you wouldn't have believed me. You needed to see it for yourself. Benji ran his hands through his hair, looking lost. Oliver, what you did, recording your mother, hiding the videos, making sure Eleanor walked in on them, that's not normal. That's not something a 9-year-old should be doing. Oliver's face hardened. Mommy was hurting you. Someone had to stop her. I leaned forward and said gently, Oliver, honey, we know you were trying to protect your dad. But the way you did it, it wasn't healthy. It wasn't safe for you. Oliver stood up, his small body rigid with anger. You don't understand. None of you understand. Mommy was bad. Uncle Lenny was bad. They were going to keep lying and lying and lying, and nobody was going to stop them. So I stopped them. And I'm not sorry. He stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him. Benji and I sat there, stunned. This wasn't just trauma. This was something deeper, something darker. Oliver had taken on the role of judge, jury, and executioner in his own family, and he'd done it with the cold calculation of someone much older, much more damaged. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Oliver, about the drawings he'd made, about the videos he'd recorded, about the way he'd manipulated the situation to expose Vanessa and Lenny. And I thought about what Vanessa had said, that Oliver had promised to make sure everyone found out. What if this wasn't over? What if Oliver had more planned? What if his revenge wasn't just about exposing the affair, but about punishing everyone involved? The next morning, I went into Oliver's room while he was at school. I know it was wrong, I know it was an invasion of privacy, but I needed to understand what was going on in his head. I looked through his things, his drawings, his tablet, his notebooks. And what I found terrified me. There were lists. Detailed lists of Vanessa's routines, Lenny's habits, even Benji's schedule. There were notes about where Vanessa worked, what kind of car she drove, where she liked to eat. Oliver hadn't just been documenting the affair. He'd been studying them, learning them, preparing for something. And then I found the journal. It was a small, black notebook hidden under his mattress. I opened it and read page after page of Oliver's thoughts, written in his careful, childish handwriting. He wrote about how much he hated his mother, how much he hated Lenny, how they deserved to suffer for what they'd done. And on the last page, dated just 3 days ago, he'd written, Phase 2 starts soon. They think it's over. But it's not. I'm going to make them pay for real this time. I felt sick. I felt scared. I felt like I was holding a bomb in my hands and didn't know how to defuse it. I took the journal and showed it to Benji when he got home from work. His face went from confusion to horror as he read it. We need to get him help, Benji said. Real help. This isn't just anger. This is. I don't know what this is. We called Oliver's therapist and scheduled an emergency session. But even as we did, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were too late. That whatever Oliver had planned, whatever Phase 2 meant, was already in motion. And I was right. 3 days later, Vanessa's car was vandalized. Someone had slashed all 4 tires, smashed the windows, and spray-painted the word liar across the hood. The police investigated, but they had no leads. Benji asked Oliver if he knew anything about it. Oliver shook his head, but I saw the ghost of a smile on his face. And I knew. I knew it was him. Or someone he'd paid. Or someone he'd convinced. My 9-year-old grandson had just committed his first act of real, tangible revenge. And the scariest part was, I didn't know if I wanted to stop him. If you're still watching this, if you're as horrified and fascinated as I am by what my grandson has become, then please, subscribe to this channel. Share this story. And check the description box below for more stories like this, because the truth is, revenge is never simple. It's never clean. And it's never, ever over when you think it is. The therapist's name was Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that seemed unshakable. She'd been working with Oliver for weeks, and she told us he was making progress, that he was starting to open up about his feelings, that the anger was beginning to subside. But after the car vandalism incident, Dr. Hendricks called us in for a meeting without Oliver present. She sat across from Benji and me in her office, her expression serious. I need to be honest with you, she said. Oliver is not making the progress I initially thought. In fact, I'm concerned that he's getting worse. He's showing signs of conduct disorder, a pattern of behavior that includes aggression, destruction of property, and a lack of remorse for his actions. If left untreated, this could develop into something more serious as he gets older. Benji looked like he'd been punched. What are you saying? That my son is, what? Dangerous. Dr. Hendricks chose her words carefully. I'm saying that Oliver has experienced significant trauma, and instead of processing it in a healthy way, he's channeling it into revenge fantasies and, now, actual acts of revenge. He needs intensive therapy, possibly medication, and a structured environment where he can learn healthier coping mechanisms. I asked if she thought Oliver was responsible for vandalizing Vanessa's car. Dr. Hendricks sighed. I can't say for certain without evidence. But based on our sessions, based on the things he's told me and the things he's written in his journals, I believe he's capable of it. And I believe he's planning more. She looked at both of us with genuine concern. You need to take this seriously. Oliver is a child, yes, but he's a child with a lot of anger and a surprising amount of resourcefulness. If he continues down this path, it won't just be vandalism. It could escalate into something much worse. Benji and I left that session feeling shell-shocked. We'd thought we were protecting Oliver, helping him heal, but instead, he was spiraling. That night, Benji sat Oliver down for a serious conversation. He asked him point-blank if he'd vandalized Vanessa's car. Oliver denied it, but his eyes told a different story. Benji asked if he was planning to hurt Vanessa or Lenny in any way. Oliver said no, but again, I could see the lie in his face. He was getting better at hiding it, but he wasn't perfect yet. We made the difficult decision to send Oliver to a residential treatment program for children with behavioral issues. It was in a facility in California, a place that specialized in trauma and anger management. Benji felt like he was failing as a father, like he was abandoning his son when Oliver needed him most. But Dr. Hendricks assured us it was the right choice, that Oliver needed more help than we could give him at home. The day we drove Oliver to the airport, he didn't cry. He didn't argue. He just sat in the back seat, staring out the window, silent and distant. At the airport, before he went through security, Oliver hugged me. It was the first real affection he'd shown in weeks. He whispered in my ear, "Don't worry, Grandma. I'll be good. I promise." But there was something in his voice that didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like a threat. Like he was saying, "I'll be good, but they won't." I watched him walk through security with a staff member from the treatment center, and I felt a deep, bone-chilling fear that we'd just made a terrible mistake. With Oliver gone, Benji and I had to deal with the aftermath of everything that had happened. Benji finalized his divorce from Vanessa. She didn't fight for custody anymore. She knew she'd lost. She gave birth to a daughter 3 months later, a little girl she named Ruby. Lenny was there for the birth, playing the role of proud father, and it made me sick to think about. They'd built a new life on the ruins of the old one, and they seemed perfectly happy to forget about the destruction they'd left behind. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't forgive. And even though Oliver was thousands of miles away in a treatment center, I knew he couldn't either. He called once a week, always sounding cheerful and positive, telling us about his therapy sessions and the friends he was making. But I didn't trust it. I'd seen behind the mask. I knew what lived inside him. And I knew that one day, when he was older, when he was stronger, when he had more resources and more freedom, he would come back to finish what he'd started. 6 months into his treatment, we got a call from the center. Oliver had run away. He'd slipped out during a supervised outdoor activity and vanished. They'd searched the surrounding area, called the police, issued an alert, but there was no sign of him. Benji flew to California immediately, frantic and terrified. I stayed in Sydney, coordinating with the police, making calls, trying to find any lead. For 3 days, we heard nothing. And then, on the 4th day, Oliver showed up at Lenny and Vanessa's apartment in Oregon. Vanessa called Benji, hysterical. She said Oliver had knocked on her door, looking tired and dirty but otherwise unharmed. She'd let him in, given him food and water, and called Benji immediately. But what scared her, what she told Benji through tears, was what Oliver had said when she asked him why he'd come there. He'd looked at her, at baby Ruby sleeping in her crib, and said, "I wanted to see what you chose him over my dad for. I wanted to see if it was worth it." And then he'd smiled, that cold, unsettling smile, and said, "It wasn't." Benji flew to Oregon and picked up Oliver. The treatment center agreed to take him back, but with stricter supervision. Oliver didn't resist. He didn't argue. He just went quietly, like he'd made his point and was satisfied. But I knew better. I knew that Oliver had gone to Oregon for a reason, and it wasn't just to see Vanessa and the baby. He'd gone to send a message. He'd gone to remind them that he was still watching, that he hadn't forgotten, and that one day, when they least expected it, he would make them pay. That was 2 years ago. Oliver is 11 now, still in the treatment program. He's made significant progress, according to his therapists. He's learned to manage his anger, to express his emotions in healthier ways, to understand the consequences of his actions. Benji visits him once a month, and I talk to him on the phone every week. He sounds like a normal kid now, talking about school and sports and video games. But I know the truth. I know what he's capable of. And I know that the anger is still there, buried deep, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Vanessa and Lenny are still together, raising Ruby in that small town in Oregon. They seem happy, from what I can tell. They've moved on, built a new life, left the past behind. But I haven't. Benji hasn't. And Oliver definitely hasn't. We're all just waiting, in our own ways, for the other shoe to drop. For the revenge that Oliver promised to come to fruition. Because deep down, I know it's not over. It will never be over. Not until Oliver decides it is. Oliver was released from the treatment program 6 months ago, just after his 12th birthday. He'd spent nearly 3 years there, and by all accounts, he'd made remarkable progress. The staff told us he was a model patient, cooperative, engaged, showing genuine remorse for his past behavior. He'd completed his therapy, participated in group sessions, and even mentored younger kids who were struggling with similar issues. Dr. Hendricks herself signed off on his release, saying she believed Oliver had done the work necessary to reintegrate into normal life. But I had my doubts. You don't just turn off that kind of anger, that kind of calculated revenge, like flipping a switch. I'd seen what Oliver was capable of. I'd read his journals. I'd watched him manipulate situations with the cunning of someone 3 times his age. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the past 3 years hadn't been about healing, they'd been about learning. Learning to hide it better. Learning to be more patient. Learning to play the long game. Oliver came back to Sydney to live with Benji. They'd moved to a different house, a fresh start in a quieter suburb. Benji had met someone new, a kind woman named Rachel who worked as a teacher and had no children of her own. She was good for Benji, patient, understanding, supportive. And she was good with Oliver too, treating him with warmth but also maintaining healthy boundaries. For a while, things seemed normal. Oliver went to school, made friends, joined the soccer team. He was polite to Rachel, respectful to his father, and affectionate with me during our weekly video calls. But then strange things started happening. Small things at first. Vanessa called Benji one day, upset because someone had signed her up for dozens of spam email lists and magazine subscriptions. A week later, Lenny's truck was keyed in the marina parking lot. Then Vanessa started receiving anonymous letters at her workplace. Nothing threatening, just quotes about karma and justice and consequences. The police investigated each incident but found no evidence linking them together or pointing to any particular suspect. Benji asked Oliver if he knew anything about it. Oliver looked genuinely confused and said no. But I saw something flicker in his eyes, just for a second, a spark of satisfaction, quickly hidden. I pulled Benji aside later and told him I thought Oliver was involved. Benji didn't want to believe it. He said Oliver had changed, that we needed to trust him, that we couldn't keep suspecting him every time something went wrong. And maybe he was right. Maybe I was seeing monsters where there weren't any. But my gut told me otherwise. The incidents continued, escalating slowly. Vanessa's social media accounts were hacked, and embarrassing photos and messages were leaked. Lenny lost his job at the marina after someone anonymously reported him for working under a false name. Their landlord received complaints about noise and property damage, leading to threats of eviction. Each event was carefully spaced out, untraceable, and just damaging enough to cause stress without crossing the line into anything that would trigger a serious police investigation. And through it all, Oliver remained the perfect child. He excelled at school, earning straight A's. He was popular with his classmates. He volunteered at a local animal shelter on weekends. He was everything a parent could hope for. But I watched him closely during family dinners and video calls, and I saw the truth beneath the surface. The way he'd ask casual questions about Vanessa and Lenny, where they were living, where they worked, how baby Ruby was doing. The way he'd smile when Benji mentioned that they were having problems. The way he'd change the subject quickly, smoothly, whenever anyone got too close to connecting him to the incidents. One night, I flew back to Sydney to visit. I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming, that all of these small acts of revenge were building towards something larger. I stayed with Benji and Rachel, and one evening when everyone else was asleep, I went into Oliver's room. He was awake, sitting at his desk, working on something on his laptop. When he saw me, he quickly closed it, but not before I caught a glimpse of what looked like a spreadsheet, rows and rows of data, names, dates, addresses. "What are you working on?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Oliver smiled. "Just a school project, Grandma. Nothing interesting." I sat down on his bed. "Oliver, I need you to be honest with me. Are you behind the things that have been happening to Vanessa and Lenny?" He looked at me with those serious eyes, the ones that had seen too much and carried too much weight. "Would it matter if I was?" he asked. "Would you try to stop me?" I realized I didn't have an answer, because part of me, a dark, angry part that I'd been trying to ignore, wanted them to suffer. Wanted them to feel even a fraction of the pain they'd caused. But another part of me, the part that loved my grandson and wanted him to have a normal life, knew that this path would destroy him. "Oliver," I said softly, "revenge isn't going to make you feel better. It's not going to undo what happened. It's just going to eat away at you until there's nothing left but anger." He smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was sad and tired and far too old for his 12-year-old face. "I know, Grandma. But I can't stop. Not yet. Not until they understand what they did. Not until they feel it the way we felt it." I asked him what he was planning, but he wouldn't tell me. He just said, "Don't worry. Nobody's going to get hurt. Not physically, anyway. I just want them to lose everything they took from us. I want them to understand what it's like to have your life torn apart by someone you trusted." I left his room that night feeling helpless and terrified. I thought about telling Benji, but what would I say? That Oliver admitted to nothing but also admitted to everything? That he was planning something but wouldn't say what? Benji was finally happy again, finally moving forward with his life. I didn't want to drag him back into the darkness. So I kept quiet, and I waited, and I watched. The reckoning came 2 months later. Someone, and we all knew who, even though there was no proof, sent a comprehensive package to the Australian immigration authorities. It contained evidence that Vanessa had been working in Australia on a tourist visa for the first year she lived there, before she'd gotten her work visa. It showed that she'd lied on her visa applications, omitted previous addresses, and failed to disclose prior immigration violations in another country. The evidence was meticulously documented, cross-referenced, and impossible to ignore. Vanessa's visa was revoked. She was given 30 days to leave Australia. Lenny, who'd been living there illegally since he had no visa at all, was deported immediately. They had to sell everything quickly, pack up their lives, and move back to the United States. Baby Ruby, who was now 3 years old, was uprooted from the only home she'd ever known. And through it all, Oliver watched from a distance, his revenge finally complete. When Benji found out what had happened, he was shocked. Vanessa called him, crying, begging for help, asking if he had any connections who could intervene. But there was nothing he could do. The evidence against her was solid. And when he hung up the phone and looked at Oliver, who was sitting on the couch doing homework, he didn't ask if Oliver was responsible. Because deep down, he already knew. We all knew. That night, after Oliver went to bed, Benji and I sat in the kitchen. "He did it," Benji said quietly. "My 12-year-old son just destroyed 2 people's lives." I nodded. "Are you going to confront him?" Benji shook his head. "What's the point? He'd just deny it. And honestly, Mom, part of me is glad. Part of me thinks they deserved it." We sat in silence, both of us grappling with the uncomfortable truth that we were proud and terrified of Oliver in equal measure. It's been 6 months since Vanessa and Lenny were forced to leave Australia. They're back in the United States now, living in a small apartment in Portland, trying to rebuild their lives. Lenny works at a warehouse, loading trucks for minimum wage. Vanessa does data entry from home, barely making enough to cover rent and childcare for Ruby. They've lost everything, their home, their careers, their fresh start. They're exactly where Oliver wanted them to be, broken, struggling, and paying for their sins every single day. Oliver never admitted to what he did. When Benji finally confronted him directly, Oliver looked him in the eye and said, "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about." But if someone did report Vanessa for visa fraud, they were just doing the right thing. She broke the law. She deserved consequences. And technically, he was right. Vanessa had violated immigration law. The evidence against her was legitimate. Oliver hadn't lied or fabricated anything. He'd just gathered the truth and presented it in a way that couldn't be ignored. But the way he did it, the patience and calculation it required, the sheer amount of research and planning for a 12-year-old to pull off something like that, it was chilling. And it made me wonder what else he was capable of. What else he might do in the future when someone crossed him or hurt someone he loved. Because that's the thing about revenge. Once you taste it, once you see how effective it can be, it becomes addictive. It becomes your go-to solution for every problem. Dr. Hendricks, when we consulted her about the situation, said that Oliver had likely been planning this for years, even while he was in treatment. He'd learned to hide his intentions, to present himself as healed and healthy, while secretly gathering information and waiting for the right moment to strike. She said it was both impressive and deeply concerning, and that Oliver would need continued therapy to ensure he developed healthier coping mechanisms. But she also said something that stuck with me: Oliver isn't a monster. He's a deeply wounded child who learned that the adults in his life couldn't protect him, so he had to protect himself. And he did it the only way he knew how. I think about that a lot. About how we failed Oliver. How Vanessa and Lenny's betrayal didn't just hurt Benji, it fundamentally changed Oliver's understanding of the world. It taught him that people you love can hurt you in the worst possible ways. That trust is foolish and vulnerability is dangerous. That the only person you can rely on is yourself, and sometimes, you have to take justice into your own hands because the world won't do it for you. Benji has tried to have conversations with Oliver about all of this. About right and wrong, about forgiveness, about letting go of anger. But Oliver just listens politely and says all the right things. I understand, Dad. I know revenge isn't the answer. I know I need to focus on my own life and let go of the past. But his eyes tell a different story. His eyes say, I won. I made them pay. And I'd do it again. Rachel, to her credit, has been a stabilizing force. She doesn't know the full extent of what Oliver did, but she knows enough to understand that he's a complicated kid with a difficult past. She treats him with consistent kindness and firm boundaries, and slowly, I've seen Oliver soften toward her. He's even started calling her Rachel Mom, which makes her smile and makes Benji's eyes water. Maybe, just maybe, having a stable, loving home with adults who show up for him will be enough to redirect his path. Maybe he won't grow up to be the kind of person who solves problems with calculated revenge. Maybe he'll find healthier ways to process his pain. But I'm not naive. I've seen too much. I know that what happened to Oliver, what he witnessed, what he carried, what he did, has left permanent marks. The therapists can help. The stable home environment can help. Time can help. But some wounds don't fully heal. They just scar over, and sometimes, when the right trigger comes along, they split open again. As for me, I've had to do my own reckoning with what happened. I flew 14 hours to surprise my son, and instead, I walked into a nightmare that's still unfolding years later. I saw my brother's ultimate betrayal. I watched my grandson transform from an innocent child into something darker and more complex. And I've had to ask myself hard questions about my own role in all of this. Should I have seen the signs earlier? Should I have known that Lenny was capable of such betrayal? Should I have been more aware of what was happening in Benji's marriage? And when I found out about Oliver's revenge plans, should I have stopped him more forcefully, even if it meant betraying his trust? These questions keep me up at night. There are no easy answers. I've also had to confront my own feelings about Vanessa and Lenny's downfall. Because the truth is, when I heard they'd been deported, when I learned they'd lost everything, I felt a surge of satisfaction. A dark, ugly part of me was glad. They'd hurt my family, and now they were hurting. That's karma, right? That's justice. But then I think about Ruby, that innocent little girl who did nothing wrong but is paying the price for her parents' sins. She's been uprooted, displaced, growing up in poverty because of choices she had no control over. And I feel guilty for my satisfaction, guilty for being glad about something that hurts a child. Life is complicated like that. Revenge is never clean. It never affects just the people you want it to affect. It ripples outward, touching everyone, damaging everyone, leaving scars that last generations. Oliver's revenge hurt Vanessa and Lenny, yes. But it also hurt Ruby. It hurt Benji, who now has to live with the knowledge of what his son is capable of. It hurt Rachel, who walked into a family situation far more complex than she bargained for. And it hurt Oliver himself, because every act of revenge takes a piece of your soul, hardens your heart just a little bit more. I think about the moment I walked through that apartment door in Sydney, the moment everything changed. If I could go back, would I do it differently? Would I call first, announce my visit, give them a chance to hide the evidence of their betrayal? Would I have spared Oliver the trauma of seeing what he saw, of carrying the burden he carried? Or would everything have unfolded the same way eventually, just on a different timeline? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But what I do know is this: betrayal leaves wounds that never fully heal. It changes you on a fundamental level. It changes how you see people, how you trust, how you love. And when that betrayal happens to a child, when it shatters their sense of safety and security, the damage runs even deeper. Oliver will carry what happened for the rest of his life. It will shape his relationships, his choices, his view of the world. And all Benji and I can do is love him, support him, and hope that love is enough to balance out the darkness. Benji is doing better now. He's fully moved on from Vanessa, building a life with Rachel, and they're even talking about getting married next year. He's a good father to Oliver, present and engaged, always making time despite his demanding job. And he's learning to forgive himself for not seeing the signs earlier, for being so consumed with work that he missed what was happening in his own home. That's been the hardest part for him, not the betrayal itself, but the guilt of feeling like he failed to protect his son. As for Vanessa and Lenny, I haven't spoken to either of them since that day in the diner in Oregon. Lenny has tried to reach out a few times over the years, emails, text messages, even a letter once, but I've ignored them all. I meant what I said to him that day: he's dead to me. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, too fundamental to move past. He's my brother by blood, but he's no longer my family in any way that matters. Vanessa sends occasional photos of Ruby to Benji, trying to maintain some connection since Ruby is technically Oliver's half-sister. Benji looks at them briefly and files them away without showing Oliver. He says when Oliver is older, when he's more mature, they can decide together whether to establish any kind of relationship with Ruby. But for now, it's too complicated, too raw, too risky. I visit Sydney every few months now. I've made it a priority to be present in Oliver's life, to be a stable, loving force he can count on. We go to his soccer games together. We have dinner every Friday night when I'm in town. We talk about school and friends and his dreams for the future. He wants to be a lawyer, he told me recently. He wants to help people who've been wronged get justice. And I smiled when he said it, but inside, my heart broke a little. Because I know what he really means. He wants to be in a position of power, where he can punish wrongdoers, where he can make sure people pay for their sins. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe Oliver will channel his experiences into something positive. Maybe he'll become the kind of lawyer who fights for victims, who holds abusers accountable, who stands up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Maybe his pain will fuel his purpose, and he'll help others in ways we can't even imagine yet. That's what I choose to believe on my good days. On my bad days, I worry that he'll become vindictive and ruthless, using the law as a weapon to settle personal scores. Only time will tell which version of Oliver emerges. He's 12 now, still so young, still so much growing left to do. And I'll be here, watching, supporting, hoping, and yes, worrying. Because once you've seen what someone is truly capable of, you can never fully unsee it. You can never go back to innocent assumptions. You carry that knowledge with you, and it colors everything that comes after. So what's the lesson in all of this? What wisdom can I possibly extract from this nightmare? I've thought about it a lot, turned it over in my mind countless times, and here's what I've come to understand: betrayal is inevitable. People will hurt you, sometimes the people you trust most. And when that happens, you have choices. You can let it destroy you, consume you, turn you into someone driven entirely by revenge. Or you can feel the pain, acknowledge the anger, and then make a conscious choice to move forward without letting it define you. Oliver chose revenge. At 9 years old, when he should have been thinking about cartoons and candy, he chose revenge. And it worked, in a sense. He exposed the truth. He made sure Vanessa and Lenny faced consequences. He protected his father. But the cost was his innocence, his childhood, his ability to trust and be vulnerable. And that's a heavy price to pay, no matter how satisfying the revenge might feel in the moment. If you've made it this far in my story, if you've stuck with me through all the pain and betrayal and complicated family drama, then I want you to know something: you're not alone. Whatever you're going through, whatever betrayal you've faced or are facing right now, you're not alone. And you have choices. You can choose revenge, and maybe it will feel good for a while. But I'm telling you from experience, from watching what it did to my grandson, it comes with a cost. It always comes with a cost. The better choice, the harder choice, is to feel your feelings, get support, set boundaries, and then focus on building something new rather than destroying what was. I'm not saying forgive and forget. I'm not saying let people get away with hurting you. I'm saying protect yourself, remove toxic people from your life, and then invest your energy in creating joy and love and meaning, rather than in elaborate revenge plots. But I also understand if you can't do that. I understand if the anger is too big, too overwhelming, too justified. Because some betrayals are so deep that revenge feels like the only response that makes sense. And if that's where you are, I'm not judging you. I can't judge you. Not after everything I've seen, everything I've felt, everything I've secretly been glad about even though I know I shouldn't be. This is the complicated truth about betrayal and revenge. There are no simple answers. No clear rights and wrongs. Just wounded people trying to survive, trying to make sense of senseless hurt, trying to regain some control in a world that's proven itself unpredictable and cruel. We're all just doing the best we can with the cards we've been dealt. I'm 65 now. Benji is 36. Oliver is 12. We're 3 generations trying to heal from the same wound, each in our own way, each carrying our own piece of the pain. And we'll keep trying, keep healing, keep hoping that eventually, the good days will outnumber the bad ones, and the love will be stronger than the anger. That's all any of us can do, really. Keep trying. Keep loving. Keep hoping. Even when the world has shown us its ugliest face. Even when the people we trusted most have proven themselves untrustworthy. Even when a 9-year-old boy has to become a detective and a judge and an executor of justice because the adults around him failed to protect him. We keep going. We keep trying. We keep loving. Because the alternative, letting the betrayal win, letting it turn us into people consumed by revenge and anger, is no way to live. Oliver taught me that. He showed me the destination of the revenge path, and it's a dark, lonely place that no one should have to inhabit, especially not a child. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: feel your anger. Acknowledge your pain. Set your boundaries. Protect yourself. But don't let revenge become your purpose. Don't let someone else's betrayal define the rest of your life. Because they've already taken enough from you. Don't give them your future too. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for staying with me through all 14 hours of that flight, through that apartment door, through the discovery, through the legal battles, through Oliver's transformation, through the deportation, through everything. If this resonated with you, if you found something in here that helped you make sense of your own pain, please share this video. Subscribe to this channel. And check the description box below for more stories like this. Stories about real people surviving real betrayal and finding their way through to the other side, however messy and complicated that journey might be. We're all in this together, navigating the complicated landscape of human relationships, trying to figure out how to trust again after we've been burned, trying to protect our hearts while still remaining open to love. It's the hardest thing in the world. But it's also the most important. Because at the end of the day, connection is all we have. Love is all we have. Family, chosen or biological, is all we have. And we have to fight to protect it, to preserve it, even when it gets messy, even when it hurts, even when it requires us to forgive the unforgivable or at least coexist with it. This is Eleanor Mitchell, signing off. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. And remember, whatever you're going through, you're stronger than you think, you're more resilient than you know, and your story isn't over yet. There are more chapters to come. Make sure they're chapters you can be proud of, not ones written entirely in anger and revenge. The choice is yours. It's always been yours. Choose wisely.